For nearly 3 decades, EPIC has been sending its students into the world. We call it immersive education. It takes them beyond the classroom, it takes them beyond the necessary prerequisite of rational and rigorous intellectual training to have to encounter the people who are on the front lines of human and civil rights, to be able to have them test their preconceptions to gain a far better nuanced global sensitivity of the issues they must confront, and to begin to sense whether or not they have the dynamism and flexibility to think beyond their own upbringing, their own sociology, to be more empathic and compassionate to the issues that they must confront.
Hi, I'm Caitlin, this is Jack, and we are delegates from Tufts University at the Oslo Freedom Forum.
I climb this hill, watching so still. I took to the fears of all I held dear, but up on this height, a majestic sight flooded the skies with how I could feel you near. Oh, I could search through the darkest wonders why I'd never find.
So today was our first day, full day in Oslo for the Freedom Forum. We started off the day with a press conference that was just pretty much stacked with people. Yulia Marshevska, we had a chance to speak with her following the press conference, and we both got to ask her a few questions that we had written and been curious about prior to the conference.
Jack asked a question about the role of new technology. She was very well spoken.
We don't want to be a country based on the ideology, on the vertical authority or whatever. I believe that only the highest level of education and using of the technological tools will help my country to become a real modern state. Because for the years we were kind of a heritage of the Soviet Union times. We were using old instruments, but we were having normal modern brains. Today, after this act of aggression from Russia, new technologies is a chance for us to be heard.
One of the things I asked Yulia about was whether she thinks the crisis in Ukraine is, as the West calls it, a crisis or a war. And Yulia was very clear that she thinks that because it's a military invasion with deliberate intention, it is a war.
If one country make a military aggression against other country, killing the people on the border and stealing territory, a real territory,
Yes.
how will you call that? For me, it's a war.
It's just, it kind of reflected on the opinion of a lot of Ukrainians on how the West, especially the United States, has really straddled the line during the conflict and, for lack of a better term, kind of gone for the politically correct route, wherein we tacitly support Ukraine's move for independence, and then we, in certain ways, make that more vocal. When you have the director of the CIA visiting Ukraine, when you have people that are, prominent American politicians voicing their support, but at the same time, you fail to recognize the exact nature of the conflict itself. It definitely expresses the fact that the West isn't willing to go all the way, but at the same time, to a large degree, that's understandable. We also met Vera. She is a journalist who works for Nova Gazeta, and we've been kind of engaging in dialogue with her.
She spent a lot of the conference walking around with us and talking to us not only about what we talk about with other people, but also her opinions. She wants to know a lot about the US too, which is interesting. But we've had the chance to ask her about propaganda in Russia, about what she thinks should happen because of Ukraine, the role that she thinks gas plays in the relationship between Russia and Ukraine.
she wasn't afraid, she wasn't hesitant, she wasn't shy about saying, no, that conception of Russia is incorrect. And in her case, being that she's here, being that she is writing for a newspaper that it has a daily struggle with the government of Russia, it was a uniquely uniquely trustworthy perspective that was also kind of a polemic to the typical American perspective of the nature of life in Russia, of the character of repression. It's really impossible until you have a Russian there whose perspective is important, who's telling you, no, that's incorrect, here's why, here's what the reality is. Here's what you need to change about the way that you're looking at this problem.
Yeah, talking to Vieira gave me a very interesting perspective on the level of propaganda in Russia. I was under the impression that it is a very propaganda state and that the government controls the media to a significant degree, but she made it clear that this is not necessarily true. It does to some degree, but there is the freedom to express things that are against the government. They will meet resistance, but it does exist.
Following the workshops, we had a reception that was in Oslo Town Hall. There, we got to interact with a lot more people that were speakers, that were mingling with people. Sergei Popovich, founder of Canvas, and one of the leaders of Otpor during the bulldozer revolution in Serbia. We got to interact briefly with Bill Broder, founder of Hermitage, and we got to say hi to Pussy Riot.
It seemed as though they were a little overwhelmed, and that limited the degree to which we could talk to them. We'll see how it works out later on in the week when they speak, but I was expecting them to have more to say on the subject.
So today we've had some interactions with people that have worked with Kasparov in the past or otherwise related to him. He's kind of a figure that tends to take the air out of the room. Yeah.
We're hoping to be able to talk to him, but we're also very wary that he might not take us as seriously as we'd hope, and that we might not have questions that he respects. I'm slightly terrified to talk to him, to be honest.
And I believe that today, each of you who believe in freedom, justice, human values, is Ukrainian in your heart, a little. As one Georgian singer said, we are all Ukrainians. And I ask you to stay with us in this fight. I ask you to join us because I believe that goodness has to stay together because only together we can create miracles. Thank you.
So the first session that we had today was Ideas for Empowerment, which was opened by Bassem Youssef, and then continued by some speakers like Yunmi Park. Special interest to us was Yulia Marashevska, of course. And the kind of common thread throughout this first session was dynamic means and methods of activism and of drawing attention to specific issues, whether they be regional, national, or international.
So, Marashevska talked a lot about engaging the entire international community in what's going on in Ukraine. Her point was, we are all Ukrainian. And by this she meant that the entire international community is affected by what happens in revolution against oppressive regimes. We talked to Pussy Riot after the third session, and that was really interesting because a lot of what we were talking to them about was the forum that we're having in February. So they unfortunately received a lot of information and we didn't get to ask questions. So I still am leaving this with an awful lot of questions for Pussy Riot that I'm not really sure I'm going to get answered, which is kind of a bummer. Nadia and Masha became the most engaged in our conversation when we started talking about what they were interested in, which was prison rights. And that's definitely their main focus of the moment, their main political focus.
They kind of drew attention to the fact that while in the United States, the prison system and punishment is administered differently on a state-by-state basis, given the verticalization of power in Russia, it's fairly uniform in its harshness. An interesting point that I think we need to consider further, and the implications of that, along with the other numerous implications of the verticalization of power in Russia.
At dinner, we had a plan. We were going to go sit with the most important Russian people because we hadn't done so the night before and we kind of felt like we missed out. So we were awkwardly surveying the room and we somehow picked a table that ended up being Kasparov and his wife. Also sitting at the table was Vladimir, who runs Khodorkovsky's campaign, and they hope to establish themselves in the 2016 Duma elections as well as the 2018 presidential elections, and hopefully put Khodorkovsky in power.
Following this, we had a discussion with Kasparov. He's actually a pretty nice guy.
Yeah, he really likes the Freedom Forum. He had a lot of good things to say about how this is the biggest conference of its kind that brings people from all over the world to open discussion about human rights violations from all over, everywhere.
He
And
focused a lot on the personal engagement and the positive results of that, which are something that you just really don't experience nearly as much in other conferences.
Vladimir had some really interesting things to say about the possibility of Khodorkovsky becoming powerful in 2018. He thinks that there's no way Putin will win the 2018 election.
So he had a very kind of refreshing viewpoint. It was really good to hear from him. And it was also interesting to hear from Kasparov, who, as we were explaining our own symposium, provided his view on the kind of unpredictability of the nature of the current situation in Europe, which stood at odds with and at the same time kind of complemented Vladimir's more definite statements.
This was slightly at odds with Vladimir's perspective. Vladimir also brought up the fact that Khodorkovsky is in the best position to take over power from Putin.
We had the kind of signature moody Kasparov realism alongside this kind of surprising degree of optimism from Vladimir, which I hope you'll see as being indicative of Khodorkovsky's platforms himself.
The dinner in itself was just a fabulous time to meet lots of very important people in Russia. I walked away from it feeling like we'd accomplished a lot, that we'd gotten our message out there, but we'd also just met some really cool people.
Today was very dense in the best possible way. Coming to Oslo prior to the forum and thinking about it in our very long journey here, it was really hard to kind of anticipate what it was actually going to be like. You see people that had organized historically great movements of civil disobedience interacting with people that are now engaged in the same kind of work, and even though the context is different, even though the environment and the challenges themselves are different, it's clear that it's a valuable exchange, and that's the purpose of the conference, of the forum, and that in seeing that in action, it makes me very optimistic about the kind of profound effects and long-term outcomes of forums like the Oslo Freedom Forum.
And I'll fall